What's up, everybody? It's your favorite displays, favorite nerd, and today we're going to look at my 80s cartoon displays. Some shelves that I've been working on recently. They're comprised of one Billy, kind of showing off a lot of action figures. They're crammed in there to make room for all the characters that I'd like to have in a very confined space, and then there's a couple other kind of focused collections in my pod room or my podcast room that allow for a little bit more, exploration into different sort of lines of the brands, etc., etc. It's been a while since we've done one of these, and this has been done for some time, so we'll go ahead and go through it. We'll start with the TMNT villains. This is a diorama that I made, and a little fun fact, the screen in the background with the turtle's picture on it is a drawing done by myself, so it's got a little bit of my work in there as well as the diorama work. And you're gonna hear this a lot, but a lot of this was to just utilize space to house characters. I knew that my space was limited, I knew I had to cram these guys in there, and I wanted it to look somewhat purposeful. None of these are really in their final stages, maybe with one or two, but they're kind of like adapting as we move along. They get a little crammed, and it's hard to kind of account for all of them, so I do my best, but I'm pretty happy with this. The colors really sell it, and the fun fact, the little stuff like the outlining pipes around the steps, the pink pipes are bendy straws. A fun fact. Moving on to the Turtles one. This is actually one of my favorites in my whole collection, and actually a lot of my friends' favorites as well. Lots of Easter eggs in here. It's laid out well. There's plenty of room for characters to include a couple new ones, namely that Ray Fillet, which will definitely get bought. There's a number of Easter eggs, like the posters on the walls, Wine and Cheese, a lot of podcasts that I partake in. Nerd Rage Radio, of course. Tortoise in the Hare movie poster for obvious reasons. Daredevil poster because of the history of Turtles and Daredevil. If you know, you know. Laird Avenue and Eastman Street being the creators. My wife actually made the couch that Michelangelo sits on. Like, she carved the foam, sanded it down, and dressed it in fabric, and then I painted it, I think, but or added kind of the dirt stains to it and such. But yeah, that's all her. There's a lot of extra diorama pieces in this that came from different figures. That's one thing the NECA stuff has been pretty great about, is including a lot of little accent pieces as accessories that you can use for display purposes if you have something like this, and it just really came out well. The kind of slime goo, substance coming out of the sewers is all hot glue, just sort of caked up. But yeah, one of my favorite shelves in my entire collection. And as a side note, those turtles are SH Figuarts turtles. I know some people prefer the NECA. I can't deny the quality of them. They're some of the best toys I've ever bought. There's no way I could trade them out for something of lower quality. That's just not my bag. Moving on to the Cobra shelf, the idea was kind of tricky. Once again, I'm thinking about how to display a number of characters, and of course there's going to be a lot more probably in a very tight space. So it's pretty much steps. A lot of this stuff is just figuring out a way to do steps differently. So this was supposed to be some sort of throne room. Tyler the Collector did the Cobra throne, so I utilized that. I like having work from my friends in this stuff. It kind of makes the whole thing a little bit more worthwhile. My wife did some of the soft goods curtains and stuff along the sides of the rails, but this was a very easy one, but it was a very effective one in the sense of how it was done. The kind of flames on the side of the walls, if you see them, those are just thimbles with cotton painted with an airbrush. The cotton's painted with an airbrush, and they're glued to a thimble that's glued to a wall. The red carpet in the middle is not as great as it could have been, and after I did it, my buddy Joe was like, well, why didn't you just use these weights to kind of make sure they were at 90-degree angles? And I was like, smart move. Why weren't you here to help me out with that? You could have fixed that for me. You know what I mean? What good's a Cobra shelf without a Joe shelf? And this is supposed to be Ellis Island and, kind of the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty has a lot of star-shaped kind of walls around it, which is supposed to be kind of represented by the platforms that the Joes are standing on. As you can see, you can pretty much fit one Joe per platform, so I'm very limited as to how many I can ultimately have at the end of the day. But, when it's full, and that's it. I got to come to terms with that. You can't have them all, or I can't have them all, I should say. I shouldn't pretend to know what you can do. I remember when I painted the Statue of Liberty, and it's just a bunch of simple strokes of, so to speak, and nonsense, but it's like when my wife was so impressed with it, I really painted something great, but it's not great. It's just indicative enough where what it is, your brain puts the pieces of it together. And then I painted downtown Manhattan and the other side, and just the water on the other side, but it's pretty effective, and the little jagged steps just give it a different look, but they still provide the same kind of purpose. Moving on to my He-Man villains shelf, I got to first and foremost thank Russ T. He was able to help me get a lot of these figures. The only exception being Eric E., who helped me get one figure in particular that was going to be a pain for me to track down. If you notice with a sharp eye, I'm missing a Beastman, but Russ has got me. We just haven't been able to sort it out yet, but I'm buying that from him as well. So I will have a Beastman. It will be here. Don't you worry. But what was important to me with this and the He-Man shelf was that they kind of matched, and you'll see the He-Man shelf here in a minute, but they kind of like mirror each other. And I wanted to have Castle Grayskull and Snake Mountain in the background of both, because in my opinion, they were almost like characters in and of themselves. So I wanted them represented, and I didn't want to put characters in front of them, which ended up being a little bit challenging, more so with the villains and the heroes, but it ended up being a little bit challenging as well. These are all the classics. I have no intention of swapping out any of this stuff for some of the new stuff. I much prefer this. It's my bag. I think this line is pretty close to perfect in regards to its scope, scale, and what it wanted to do. But yeah, it's effective. It's simple but effective. And then we move on to the He-Man Heroes shelf, which is pretty much the same thing. They're almost completely identical. They have just about as many rows and layers. They're carved the same way. They're kind of painted the same way with different colors. That's by design. It's also by design that the Joes sit on the lowest shelf, because I knew I was going to use a yellow and green color palette, and that's a bright color, and bright colors help bring attention to bottom shelves in a way that bottom shelves often get lost with darker colors. So that was all by design. And of course the Castle of Grayskull is painted in the back because I wanted it to be there as a representative of the base, because it is really a character in and of itself, isn't it? But yeah, I'm quite happy with this. I'm quite happy with how they turned out, and I'm quite happy that it's a collection that you can kind of take the whole thing in at once, so to speak. Up top were my larger figures. I've just realized as I've gone to do this that I had the NECA TMNT Chrome Dome. He has fallen behind the shelf, so I gotta try to figure out a way to get that. I'm not sure if I have a way, but I gotta try to figure out a way. Sucks so bad. That being said, we have the two Beasts of Burden up there, along with the Crocodile from Crocmaster, and I'm don't want to sound like a broken record. It's not the most exciting thing in the world. It's just some accent pieces on top of the shelf, but it was a lot more exciting with a huge chrome dome from Turtles sitting in the middle, but he has since fallen behind the shelf. So, such a bummer. I just realized it doing this video, so like I'm a little bit bummed out while I'm making this. I also have another turtle shelf in my podcast room with the kind of comic book adaptations, along with Toka and Razor from Secret of the Ooze. They're all utilizing risers with a set of graphic novels as kind of bookends behind them. It's a little challenging to see through the camera with the lighting and stuff, but it works really well in person. And I had that exact same setup, at least conceptually, in my office with the video game Turtles and then the third-party Krang. A Mutagen Man that was gifted to me, just some random stuff, and the TMNT DVD box set, just like quirky little stuff. But I love the Turtles, and I'd like to have them represented in a lot of different ways and places, so I had them in a lot of places where I spend a lot of time. Now, in terms of G.I. Joe, I do have a separate shelf in the Nerd Rage room of kind of Bishojo stuff, along with a few books. One comic book that I've always loved, and then one book on the original toy line, along with the Bishojo statues of Lady J and Scarlet and Baroness, and, you know, just an accent piece in a different room, really. I also have a somewhat significant 3 3/4 collection of the 20th anniversary or 25th anniversary, either or Joes. They're in somewhat disarray and need to be dusted pretty bad, but I do have them. A lot of people have been, really helpful in helping me track those down. There's too many to name, but very much appreciated. I have 2 sets of Cobra ones. They're all on platforms that I built as the Star Wars 3 3/4 dioramas at one point, and since have kind of repurposed, to use for these. One, so not to waste the work I put in, but also because they're pretty effective in that space, which is pretty nice. I have 2 of these shelving units for Cobras and 2 of them for Joes, and in typical kind of Bobby fashion, I have far more villains than heroes. I'm sure a psychologist would have a field day with some of that information, but I just always like the villain design, specifically of the Joes. I found them to be kind of vastly more interesting of the Cobra than the Joes. So that's the way my collection went. Also in my pod room, I have one shelf dedicated to kind of Hordak and She-Ra. I always liked a lot of these characters and have a pretty complicated history with some of them, so I wanted to have them represented. And so I have one shelf in my pod room completely dedicated to them, which is quite nice, and I very much appreciate. So anyway, thanks for having a look. I have other stuff too, like Thundercats and Mask, but I have that prepared for another video in the future. And then I also have statues and stuff, some of the He-Man stuff and some of the G.I. Joe stuff, you know, quarter scale or fifth scale rather, but I have that planned for the future as well, so I don't kind of want them to overlap. A lot of these elements in my collection are kind of at a point where they're ready to be showed. They're not 100% complete by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not sure that any collection ever truly is, but they're definitely at a point where they can be shared, and sort of the idea of saying, you know, these are the challenges that I was faced with these particular collections, and this is how I approach these challenges, and at the end of the day, I'm pretty happy with the results that I achieved. Maybe that could be a benefit to you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.